Welcome to this week's episode of the HumanAF podcast. In true transparency, I wanted this podcast to be about real people, real experiences, the real journey, the rawness of life, and self-discovery and awareness and becoming and all these things. And this week's guest is near and dear to my heart. We go way back. She knows many more things about me than the average person. Dodds, thank you so much for being my guest this week.
You're welcome.
And this episode it revolves around something very central to the work that I do, which is around kind of waking up and making big plot twists and shifts in our life. Big pivot points. And the one catalyst that helps, one tool, I should say, the one tool that helped me, that helps people I work with, is working on values or values work. And I'd love to talk a little bit about that with Dawn, because I love the way she talks about the work. And I think it's really helpful, her story about where she has been and where she is now. I'm going to hand that over to her in a second to tell us a little bit more about herself and how we know each other, and how we came to be reconnected, and just how very human it is to get tangled up in all of the moving parts of life, and how we go along to get along, and we do our best, and our best gets clouded and our lens gets blurry with roles and rules and expectations and situations and circumstances. And just, that's real life. And these are the conversations I want to have. And so I asked Dawn if she would have this conversation with me, and she said yes. So we're going to see where it goes, because we don't know where it's going to go. I got a few questions, and we're going to ride the waves. So thank you again, Dawn, for being here. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about yourself, and how we got connected.
Okay. Like Keri-Anne said, we know each other from school days. So I'm of origin, BC, Brentwood Bay. I don't know, before, maybe not even have flagged it so much, but the big move brought me back to BC after a long time away. So this geography and rootedness in the West Coast it's pretty important. And I guess we reconnected through this thing that is a multifaceted tool of Facebook. You get to reconnect with those people from older times and see things about what they're doing and what their life is like. And it's a weird thing, because it's a tool that, if we're going to talk values, goes against all kinds of things with my values, but has brought really wonderful things into my life as well. So it was really, exciting to watch Keri-Anne's journey as she stepped into coaching. And to watch the places it took her. I don't mean geographically, although that's a big piece of it right now as well. She's out doing all kinds of things, but just, the thought patterns made a lot of sense. And there was an energy and a braveness and an authenticity that was there. An openness, a looseness. And I could feel myself getting tighter and tighter and tighter in my strategies. So I was really pulled to learn from this and to step into that energy. And it did a lot of things in my life. At the time, I was living in Montreal. I was there for 12 years after doing my PhD in England. So I went as a postdoc, and then I ended up in a series of intense jobs. And the values work, it connects to this very rupturing thing I did April Fool's Day of this year. I moved away, not just from Quebec, but from city life, from upper management. And I live in a small town in BC now, doing at-home contract work on a much different kind of pace of life. I don't know, does it give enough of an introduction?
You've basically changed almost every aspect of your life in the last year.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and it happened really fast.
Yeah, it did, and because we go back a couple of years, And there were almost like two phases, I think,
Yes.
to kind of the journey. But
Yes.
like, if you could think back to the version of you, and I don't know, you pick the time where you're like, oh, like what life was like, what felt really important to you. And maybe some of those tangled parts about like what you believed actually, with
Um,
this hindsight, being able to see it from this vantage point, like what your life was like before you stepped into values work or coaching or any of that. What was it
um,
like?
yeah, it was like, I don't know, intense spinning all the time. Um, this is the weird thing. It's not actually the values themselves that changed, because all of the intense spinning, words of like sort of, I don't know, heat and extreme tightness and layers. These are sort of the main metaphors. A lot of like layers of survival armor. I'm a competent person and I see a lot of things. And if I see a place that I can see a better way forward, I know I can contribute my work in every sense of it. Like my labor, my mental work, my emotional energy. It was very difficult for me to pull back from the places that I saw a need for an attention or where I could make a difference. So it's not so much that the values change, because all of that time of what I would call extreme overwork and maybe like extreme over responsibility, it came out of the same values I had now, but it's in finding, I don't know, it's something in unwrapping the threads of it. And I think connecting values to energy, because there was this weird, I don't know, it took me a long time to feel the finiteness of what I could do with my values.
Tell
And
me
so there
more
was,
about that. What do you mean by the finiteness of what you could do with your values? Meaning,
so
like, what did values mean? What do values mean for you?
so it's kind of like, if you care about something,
Mhm.
then like, where do you stop, right?
Like
So
like contribution. So when
yes.
you're talking, people are definitely hearing like it was really important for you to contribute to something. So if people are like having a hard time connecting to what values are, I've been told, or it's been described to me, values have been described to me in a few different ways. And one of the ways I really like it is like that if you were to, first of all, it's the things that you love and the things that matter. Like what really matters to you, what feels important to you. That's a very stripped down version. So you could easily say, well, contributing matters to me. Like,
Yeah,
and
like
it
taking
came
care of
through your
people
work.
matters.
Taking
Yeah.
care of people matters. So based on that, that I think that absolutely helps to just realize, okay, so we can have a huge list of all these values, but then how are we honoring them?
And I guess I was in a pattern of honoring them. And again, it connects back to energy. It's like the only thing that felt justifiable to take a pause from enacting those values was such extreme exhaustion that I just couldn't anymore. And this was a truth on a minute by minute, an hour by hour, a day by day, a week by week, a month by month way. And so there's nothing that I've stopped valuing about the work I was doing. It's connected to lots of really deeply held values around, I guess the work itself around diversity, but management was another thing, right? Like my values around how you take care of a staff and how you equip them for success, and you ask reasonable things of them that are actually attainable, and you reflect on the contradictions of what you're putting in front of people and expecting them to do, and you're aware of the toll that it's taking on their life and their learning patterns and all of these things. I still would define that and value that as good management. But that's where the finiteness comes in, because all of that work was connected to my values. But then the way that I acted when I went home, because I was a husk every day, every
A
day,
husk. Wow.
then you're not enacting your values in your other places, right? So in your relationship, in your friendships, with your family, with yourself. So
Yeah.
it's like, it's not so much that the values shifted, it's that I had to take a really cold, hard look at, was I enacting my values in all the different parts of my life? And the answer to that was that, like, I really wasn't. My enacting my values energy was going like 99% into my work. And to the point that, I mean, we can say it's a metaphor to feel like a machine, but I like actually really started to physically feel like a machine. Like there was just nothing of a real person left. I was just this functionality of helping create the best situation possible in a vacuum, in a black hole. There was no end.
Yeah, like that. And I think you speak to something that we can all find ourselves in the same place, which is we're honoring our values, but they're very externally motivated. And it's outward. It's like our arms and legs and all of our appendages are honoring our values, but we're, like you said, a husk, that there's nothing left and there's nothing centralized in ourselves about that says, well, I'm honoring my own values for myself. And so it's like outside in instead of inside out. And so that also speaks to those moments of like, what? Yeah, but it's good work. Like I'm doing good work. Like it's meaningful work. It's noble work. Like I love it. And it's important. Like I will have people that will almost feel like, don't take that away from me. And I swear to God, I'm sure you felt that a few times. Like, you tell me I don't want us to change. Like I don't want, because we can identify with doing our values, because that's kind of how you're describing it. Like you do your values at work, you're doing your values, but are you being valued? Are you being valued at the center of it all? And if that piece is missing, then you bear the brunt. You pay the price, which is in energy and like exhaustion and emptiness. So yeah, thank you for describing it. Yeah. So like, is there anything about that time that I don't know, that feels important to acknowledge
Oh, that it
now?
was wonderful as well. I mean, I got to work alongside incredible, it's not just that they were incredible people, the work in being so intense and so outside of patterns. I was, both big jobs I had were entrepreneurial and there was very little structure, right? So you have to manage day to day, problems break out and there's no procedure to refer to. Things were constantly evolving, and there was something in working in such fast-paced, intense environments with so many really, not just really good people, but like so many different kinds of people. So, like different generations, different nationalities and cultures, different political mindsets, different ways of being, like, all the way from music and dressing to how they think about the world. But these really just incredible, sparky people, and being surrounded by their energy and getting to help them feel more comfortable in their work, able to go further in their work. It was wonderful. I loved building that. I loved being alongside them. I loved everything I learned. I loved getting to have so many different kinds of experiences. I'm wired. I need to keep learning, and not just keep learning, but learning almost like, if you think of the messiest octopus with these like tentacles in every direction, just like through those tentacles, bringing things in and moving them around constantly. So, these were environments where I got to have that, and it gave me a lot of information, a lot of insight, a lot of experiences that, really stretched how I think. And I'm super grateful for this. And again, I was working close to my values. So I was learning things that I still want to carry. And, I was in spaces I still want to be in. It wasn't a rupture that I was after. It was more just and not having the tap open all the way. When it rains so hard, it's like, it's not raindrops coming down. It's just like the sky just opened and water's falling down from it. Yeah, so it's more, going towards just, can I be a rain storm instead of a deluge?
Okay, so here's a pattern that I see with the women mostly that work with me is that they're full on. You're full on, like you're here for the whole thing. And that is a huge value. Like I'm here for life. I'm here for the whole experience. I want all of it. And oh God, you're just saying so many things. I hope you listener are and even you Dawn, like are hearing like this is why it's tricky. Like this is why it's tricky because you love the diversity, you love the learning, you love the aliveness, you love the like what it showed you were capable of. Like this is the other piece that I can definitely relate to personally, which is there was something about urgency sometimes or being thrown into the deep end that would show me what I was capable of. Did I love those cornered moments? Did I love kind of barely having my neck above water? No. But when I got to shore and I was like, whoa, like, you know what I mean? I survived another day or I pulled it off. There was a high to it. And there was also like another notch in my belt, so to speak, of identity, of like, that's me. I can count on me in a way. Like, I don't think it was very conscious, but it can almost be a pattern, like you were saying, of knowing ourselves and only knowing ourselves through what we've created and how like what a slippery slope it can be and how there's a part of us that's just so thirsty for life or experience, like on a soul level I'm talking, like it comes from a depth of I want to really be here, and you're just soaking it in and saying yes. Whoa. I can't forget that. It's like saying yes to all the things, and almost to the point where we think that not that we're indispensable. Okay. What I'm hearing is like, because I can, I will. Like, it's like, because I can, I will. And then there's that, well, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think that's where it can feel like, but I'm here and this is, it's kind of like, this is what I'm here to, came here to help. Like, I always find this nucleus in behind all of the activity behind the women that come to me, which is like, I'm here to help. And like, this is how I help. And it also helps me know who I am. And I feel good about that. And I love it. And I also feel like shit, and it's like, okay, like, so what can happen? And maybe you can talk a little bit about this from your perspective, because I see it from mine, which is like, I'm very aware of the parts that have built your life brick by brick, road by road, decision by decision, that knows something has to change. But it's almost like Sophie's Choice. It's like, I'm dating myself there with that movie, but look it up. Look it up, Gen X, Gen Zers, whatever, not Gen Zs, anyway, millennials. But it's like, if something's got to give, what and when and how? Like,
And
that's
how.
the other one, and how. And so this is the point of like, well, something does have to change. Do you remember what that point was for you? And like, I don't know, what feels kind of important to talk about from your side of things about that moment or that time.
That time. I don't, well, I guess there's kind of a precise moment, but it's a little bit after I had already realized it, which is a statement that doesn't sound like it makes sense on the surface. But I mean, it comes down to energy. So I mean, I got it's not just stretched so thin. I had used up every reserve and buffer that I had, and I was stretched out over a large number of different kinds of tasks that required a lot of deep thinking, a lot of on the fly learning, and a lot of categories that aren't we have things that we can learn more easily, that we can retain more easily. And it's, I was stretched thin doing a lot of work that was like harder work for me to do, not just that it was hours that need to go in. And I mean, there's cues of things that, I'm generally a really patient person, and you start to see things like, you're having eruptions of anger. So, when that happened, that would be like a real sign that something was wrong, because it's not my natural way of being, and it's a way of being that really doesn't sit well with me, right? I don't feel cathartic after that happens. I feel like really just so alienated from myself. So there was like, those would be, say, like specific cases. And there's a huge piece here that we can't leave out of the story. Last August, so August of 2022, my younger sister, who was just 41, died really quickly. I had been with her the night before she went in the hospital. And when she went into the hospital, we're thinking like, dehydration. She had health issues, and a vulnerability. But I wasn't thinking, she wasn't thinking anything seriously. And it turned out she had advanced colon cancer, and she died within 2 weeks. It was really abrupt. It was very destabilizing. And I actually think Keri-Anne has talked about this in some of her modules as well, right? Like this way that grief can lay things bare. So you end up with these two things sort of dovetailing. I mean, I really was already at my limit. And then this huge thing happened. And I mean, it's not just grief, I should say. I haven't had to deal with very much death in my life. Both of my grandfathers died when my parents were young. My maternal grandmother died when I was little. I have memories of it, but an emotion around it, but that of a toddler. My grandma died after her 100th year. It's a different experience. I've gone through it with relatives, but not like people out of my like sort of daily life. I hadn't I hadn't experienced loss of something that was right at my core before. So it's not just that it was grief, but I had no tools to lean into. And then it intersects with a work context where I had to work really, really long hours for the several weeks after it happened, because there was no place to offload the work. And that, I guess it connects to values, because still I held the responsibility for the things that I take care of with my work as important, right? Like I honored that responsibility even in a state of just having nothing left. So there is a story of exhaustion, but then also, like other values surface. So, I had a really difficult fall. That stretch from her death in August up to Thanksgiving was really, really, really intense, difficult, painful, exhausting. And there's, again, a laying bare, and you realize in these times of needs, you have that mix of anger, right? Like sometimes you're having these eruptions of anger that aren't you, and they're happening with the people closest to you. So it's not where you want to be your worst self, right? This makes no sense.
Well, it's revealing stuff to you. It's revealing something, it's revealing where you're at and where you're not at.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I needed to be a different person in those hours that weren't work, which meant that it's just like, it's math, right? I couldn't stay who I was, pushing the values the way I did in the workplace, and be a person in my private life that honored my values, right? Like that contradiction got torn open in the fall. That it just wasn't possible, right? Like if I keep working like this, it's not going to be possible to be a person that makes sense to me inside myself and in my personal relationships. And so then something's got to give. And I just opened the question. I had this idea that I should move back to BC. The first layer of it, the most immediate thinking, because of what my family was living,
Yeah.
was, it's family. I on, let's say, a structural level, I didn't want, I was worried about my parents, and I didn't want, just because of geography, too much of, the care for them in this situation. And as they aged, to go with my brother, because he happened to be geographically in the same province.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
had a sense of, this is a space that's going to come open, that I want to be able to contribute to filling. I don't want to always be, too busy, too worn out. And so that was a part of it. There's a big call of nature as
Yeah.
well. Like, I really, really could
Huge.
feel, it's very beautiful where I live, and that's a piece of it. But it's also just being, I don't know, more connected to nature itself, to its rhythms and its pacing. To have less concrete around me. Small things really matter. The amount of time I felt spent in bare feet from May to September, walking on surfaces that aren't just like flat hard things made by humans. It made a difference.
Like not on the concrete anymore.
Yeah. And the
Yeah.
moment, if we're going to pinpoint a moment, was when the offer was accepted, because that's when I could actually, it was just like this fireworks inside of me of all the feelings I'd sort of been holding at bay to get through my days. And in that moment, when I saw that the offer was accepted and that this could really happen, so much was just exposed. And, I knew then that I was going to do something, even if I didn't manage to sell my house on the timeline that made the move happen. Like, something has ruptured here, and I'm going to do something different, because there was just no more denying it after that moment.
It's the moment where you're almost a passenger to something greater than yourself. Like, because it said yes, it's like now you're riding the wave of what this is. This is a moment, these are moments where we get carried.
Yeah.
And this is hard to explain to people, that it's, I think when we think about going in, hiring a coach, doing the work, we really have this mentality of like, it's all down to me, and like I have to do all of the things. And what you're demonstrating is exactly what it is actually like, is that you're a part of it for sure. And yet there's this dance with moving parts and pieces that aren't you, but you're dancing with them, and you're sometimes being carried and lifted and inspired and, buoyed. And
Yeah.
other times you're working your ass off, because you, and it's and that's humbling, I think. And I think that's helpful for us to amplify for people, because I think we go into this thing, it's all down to me. It isn't, you know. Um, in hindsight, or like from your vantage point now, what are you aware of about that? About like, I don't know, because it's just, you've just described so much, so much in that moment.
um, I get, like, something that's really surfaced through this is the incredible continuity, right? So the things that came together in that pinnacle moment, like, you can go back and you see all the traces of the things, right? And it's something like I've really felt grateful for,
Yeah.
because I did have a sensation of almost a complete loss of self. But it was,
Mm.
looking back, it was really nice to go, actually, like, there's a very strong continuity in the things that I was thinking about and voicing as being pressure points. It's just like I couldn't get past certain walls, right? I couldn't get out of the loop of these feelings of over responsibility around it. And but it was really, really reassuring to look back and go, yeah, like, you had it. It's almost like there are these little, like, just enough of the life rings there that you could clutch onto. And it was quite powerful to retroactively realize
Yeah.
how many of those were in place. And I mean, it kind of goes back to your question at the beginning too, right? And my thing is
Yeah.
saying we get back in touch through Facebook. Like, those were breadcrumbs, it's like certain
Thank you.
sentences, certain words. It's like, yeah, I could just tell these things will help. And, maybe it takes time for the help to go all the way to changing the situation, but they were really, really jumping out.
So when you say yes to something and it says yes back, like that's all I keep hearing when you're talking. Like that's the dance, I guess. That's that life ring that you talk about. And I don't think we know what that feels like until we're in the process of change and making change from the inside out and starting to look and articulate what we find. Analyze maybe, but it's like, I think articulate and acknowledge is really more truthful. Some people think that the work is very analytical and like problem solving as though there's a problem, you know? And what would you say to that, actually?
But as though there's a problem? No, I
Yeah,
would.
like it's about acknowledge instead of analyzing like what's wrong with me, the words
Yeah.
acknowledgement and articulating, just from your experiential point, would you agree with that? Or like, what was that like for you?
Um, but I don't know. I don't know if it answers sort of what you're thinking, but it brings to mind this. There's tools that really helped, and the one that was enormously helpful was like observe your triggers, and really just observe them neutrally. Right. So like I get away from that. Like, is this a problem? As opposed to, okay, like where is this bundled up intensity that's not serving you the way you want it to? And the triggers raise that flag, and then to see them as like things that really help you get to the right place instead of things that are blocking you. It was really, really helpful. And it helped me a lot, like in the moment, to start noticing when I was feeling like something we could call triggered, or to go back and start observing, okay, what were those cases, and to think of them that way. It
Mhm.
was,
Like if a part of you felt defensive or protective or angry or annoyed,
yeah.
that then you went in and, I mean, the process that we did together, that I
Yeah.
facilitate to the best of my ability, I'm always just told, go in and get to know it. Like, um, meaning there's a part of you, this is where parts work gets
Yeah.
involved, but the fact that
Yes.
values are interwoven through every single part, like, because this part of you that, let's say, felt defensive or angry or frustrated, there's something important to it, that it's feeling frustrated over. And if you don't have an understanding of what that is, you can very much feel overtaken by emotion or overwhelmed.
Or by analysis, because this was, I
Yeah.
guess, the thing, right? I survived by gathering huge amounts of information and data and observation around a situation, but not necessarily the ones inside of me. um,
That was really
so
the journey though, wasn't it? Like, and I think
yeah.
you're speaking. So if anyone else has picked up on just the very human connective tissue through all of us, is that we can be very much in our head about things, thinking things through, analyzing them, wanting to name them and make lists and things like that. All valuable things to do. But there's a real process of moving from our head into ourselves, like into an embodied, energetic, you mentioned energy, and emotional experience and expression of what you're going through. Was
Yeah.
that what you're saying?
Yeah, and then like to allow, so instead of seeing the harder moments as problems, yeah, to just work with like what it lets you do, to really like stand back from the reproach around it. um
The
and that,
judgment
yeah, the judgment,
that
which
we
is
have about
connected to
it.
values, right? Because you're
Yeah.
feeling like you failed your values, but again, it's this thing of there's other ones at play, and they're interwoven in all kinds of different ways. So yeah, those moments, they come from, maybe you have three values at play, and one of those three is more important to you, but it's the one being pushed down by the other two.
It's so fascinating.
Yeah.
It sounds maybe a little overwhelming. We might be putting people in their heads, but like talking about it. But it's like battle of the values then, because what you were saying before, if I could tie it together, is that when you were in Montreal, you were honoring values. There was a whole bundle of values. There was service, there was contribution, there was community, There was your love of academia, like there was all this stuff that you valued greatly. And yet, so there was this bundle of values in Montreal. Familiarity even can be in that bundle of like, you valued it being familiar and it, and there's even a comfort there. But when you opened up the bundle of BC, there were like different values. It wasn't that community wasn't there. Community was possible. Contribution was possible. But what was glaring at you was nature and space and time, perspective, different environment, like, right?
Yeah.
And opportunity and change, like almost like catalyst in itself was a value, like for it to be catalytic, that move would almost take care of things that maybe you couldn't even name. So I think that's where people kind of get it a little like, well, we have all these values. So I've got two clusters of values here. Montreal is still here. And like BC is still here. And they're both telling a story, but they're not in competition with each other.
Yeah.
You're the main character of this play that is changing. And I think that's what happens. I think you stepped into that, like, just like I stepped into parts of my own life, your part of your story is that you stepped into Montreal and you flourished. Like you flourished into those values. And then there's change that happens. So like what's really hard, I think, about being human is that whether we like it or not, or know it also, is that we're changing. And like things change our life, both inside of us, feelings that we have, things that we all of a sudden can't stand and tolerate anymore. We wonder why. It's almost sudden, just like being in love with a certain meal, and then all of a sudden you taste it and you're just like, why do I hate this? I used to love this. And then there's almost grief around like, I'm so confused, a loss of self. I don't know what to do now if I don't love that. And I've always loved it. So there's internal change that happens, but then there's external change, like death, the loss of your sister, and like situations, disasters, like environmental things, like things we can't control, but deeply impact us, that have our values just change in importance. And all of a sudden, BC and its values, everything that it is screaming to you, calling your name, is like almost just like throbbing, like, get over here. You know what I mean? And like it's just that shift, and like how you move from one to the other. I don't know what comes up for you when I'm just doing that, but like telling that story, that's what I hear happened, right? And I think it can be very interesting to be like, wow, it wasn't just stuff that was inside of you, it was stuff that was outside of you. And what a crazy, chaotic, I want to say dance, but it almost feels like some circus or rave. It's like there's so many people and cast members, and moving parts that are breadcrumbs, that you call them, right?
Yeah.
Hints, winks, saying, oh, yeah, you don't like that, do you? Well, guess what? That doesn't happen in BC. Or like, and it's just like, damn it. It's all speaking to you. I think this is where people say your life is speaking to you. What is it saying inside and out?
And out. Yeah. I mean, the main, I don't know, this, all of it connects to, like I said, it comes this thing of energy, of time. I mean, I realized through this process that I'm very innately a deep thinker, and this, it connects to a lot of my values. And it's like this piece, I have to value the deep thinking as well. So it's weird with values, right? Because some of them are like foundational and some of them are things that are made by that foundation. But it's almost like that got inverted. I'm not able to enact my values in my life if I don't have space for deep thinking. I need to take in a lot of information and I need space to process it. So what happened was I was taking in a huge amount of information, which connects to values in all kinds of different ways. I don't just mean that I value learning, but the information lets you enact values, right? Like you need to take in information to be compassionate. You need to take in information to understand diversity, and it connects to things. But if you're not getting the time to process it, something gets, for me, right? Like I need to take these things in and then have the space to digest it. And then I can enact my values in a way that makes sense. So the change, it wasn't like there's the province, the space that the thing of going, well, back to source, closer to roots, but like closer to nature, of disrupting the work schedule so that my day has room for deep thinking. It really, like, it changes everything. And this is the biggest reality I brushed up against. I have to assert the space for that, or I turn into something that makes no sense to me. Even if I'm enacting my values, it's no longer in a way that feels connected to why those values matter if I don't have space for deep thinking. And so that's what this shift has brought back into my life. It is space to think, and also to learn, driven by things from inside of me, because I talk about this incredible input of information that was happening in Montreal and how that did suit me and did align with my values. But it was so fast and so extensive that it was rarely like of my choosing, right? I was being bombarded by information and experiences externally. And now more of my going out to like learn things and experience things, it comes from the inside out. And so I'm getting to not just do deep thinking, but do deep thinking in directions that are being guided by my own intuition, my own observations, instead of this external bombardment. Honestly, I do still find it a little bit self-indulgent. I mean, I'm aware of this incredible privilege around having the space to do that, now for about 6 months with not very much destabilization. It's a very lucky thing. I'm very grateful for this. And I do think as I build my energy back up, I can start to put myself again in more situations where there is some bombardment coming from the outside again. I think that's how we make a social contribution, but that I could start to withstand that. And I don't even want to say withstand, interact with that in a way that's healthier, that doesn't just take me down the same road again.
It's like co-creating with it
Yeah.
from a place of choice. Like you were saying, it wasn't of your choosing.
Yeah.
And by implementing or valuing space, because once you started to identify, and this is, we're breaking down the process.
Yeah.
It was like, once you understood what mattered to you most, because in identifying your values, you could gauge what like took priority based on how it felt to acknowledge. And this is the process. You start realizing what's more important than other things now. Like, it's not a year ago. It's not like, you get to be in the now and who you are now and how you're changing now, and then consciously choosing to lean into the value of space. And then you reap the benefits of learning what the outcome was when you did that. You were making better choices, or you felt better. And now what you're saying is that, life is going to bring adversity. Like, it's going to bring bombardment, and you are in a much different position. I'd say better position to co-create with adversity, remembering or anchoring into even the practice of checking in what matters to you. Like, the values grow and shift and change as you go. So it might not be space, but it might be something else, but the process, and the feeling of when something clicks, and that's inner guidance. That's inner guidance telling you through how it feels, which is a huge shift from the thinking based 100%. And what you've just described is honoring both. Deep thinking is important to you. And like, you need space to deep think. You can almost follow the threads back. And how deep thinking then allows for process, which goes into body and allows emotion and understanding and intuiting and creativity. And now you're working with many different parts of your inner team that each value different things. The mind values deep thinking, but it feels way more in connection with the more ethereal or like emotional or energetic parts. Like, they all have more of a say together. Yeah. And I would go as far as things, because you've created a deeper understanding in yourself as a result of the work you've done.
And Yeah, exactly. And that there's this thing of, yeah, I guess, okay, trying to think of how to express it. They don't need to be on full tilt all the time. Like I think that this is sort of like an anxiety voice, right? So I don't, if I can, it's almost like I had this feeling that I needed to run myself at the pace of there being urgency all the time as reassurance that I could withstand urgency. And
Because that meant what?
well, again, that's armor, right? That this
That I could
is,
do it.
yeah, it's a kind of security. I mean, I have many concerns about the state of the world,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things that working in upper management did for me is it gave me a kind of terror of how little there is beneath the surface. I was really shocked by, I mean, to my view, how many things are just holding together by a thin skin. And my
With
personal view
humans
of
behind the wheel, with like
yeah,
very, we're all flawed. We're all human. By saying you're human, you've got all your stuff that you're bringing to the table. And so we're inherently unpredictable and in a way not to be trusted. Right? In a way, because we're human and we come pretty shonky. We've all got our stuff. So I think
yeah,
when you look behind the curtain and you realize you're a part of that and they're a part of it, and it's like, whoa, we all have this. And okay, yeah.
yeah. And
The
it's
fragility,
on,
I think, the
there's a
fragility of,
fragility of
yeah,
humans, but also of structures, right? Like we've built up more and
systems.
more complex structures, but
Yeah.
we're not actually like enacting them, right? So I mean, even if you
Mm.
take something as simple as say like the policies of a company, that it's probably impressive if actually on a day-to-day basis 10% of those are actually enacted, right? Like there's when you realize like how much it's crumbling beneath the surface. So I felt this,
Yep.
it's like, if you stand back and I don't know, almost like if you get weak in your ability to endure things, what's this going to mean as waves of stuff get more complex and harder? These things are very, very alive in my head and alive since, I mean, I realize some of these things, I talk about these mind movies, and there's some things that were just present with me since I was really young that it never really occurred to me to laugh at how crazy they might sound sometimes. But like I was like 5 when I started like going, okay, like could I withstand solitary confinement if I was in prison for something?
We do not give children enough credit. Like anytime I talk to somebody about their 5-year-old, the shit that they were thinking about, the things they were processing. And then we act as though the kids that we see from an adult perspective, they're like kids. They're not kids. They are processing things on crazy deep
On
levels.
crazy,
But like
crazy levels.
when you realize that, I think that was a big piece for you, is really taking that in, of realizing how deep you thought and like what you could hold from such a young age,
From
which
such a
is
young age.
foundational, you know, and what you
Yeah.
valued at 5.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
already considering and wanting to debate your capacity, like, what am I capable of? I mean, that's fascinating. It speaks so much about your character, about your personality, about like what you're here to do, and just even your, how you think.
So yeah, all this stuff is that, and this is the thing about I one of the things that overwork and a lack of space to process did is it made me into a much more anxious person. And it's incredible how much that has come down. And it comes to this thing of, okay, so I still have all of my concerns about the world, and I still want to be, like developing my thoughts and my capacities in ways that can help with things, as with what comes to be. It's not that that's gone away, but it's like it's in every direction. So if you're trying to build up armor that matches all these different kinds of things that you worry about happening, well, you just can't maintain it all. So it's much more of going with, okay, like what are the Like, is that anxiety or that feeling or that thought giving me information that helps right now? And okay, no. Okay, do I think that it's likely to be needed in the near future? Well, there's no signs of that now. And then being able to put that aside, table it, like not to erase it, but that, and then to really focus your energy and the energy around your values on the ones that are here now. With processing time, you can do this triage, and that's part of where the overwork is so damaging, because you can't, right? You can't put things in any kind of hierarchy. It's all coming at you so fast and in such a bundle, and all the things that are coming at you are connected to your values, right? Or they need
And there's so
attention
much
for
at
reasons
stake
of your values,
when you're
and you
talking
can't triage.
There's so much at stake. So like, that's the feeling that I get when you're talking. There is so much at stake. We have all these
Yeah.
parts and pieces. And I am here to say something that I think many of us don't want to hear, but sorry, not sorry, is that we cannot, this speaks to a desire to control a little bit. It's a terrible word. We hate the word control because we think it means we're jerks or whatever. It's just like, we want to be able to control our situations and circumstances. We want safety. We want, people to get what they need. We want to make sure, everyone, there's equality, whatever it is. We want to have all the bases covered. And that's a part of this. But when you realize that there is a finiteness to your energy or your capability, because it is not sustainable, like the pace of Montreal, for example, when you look at how that was going to continue down the road, and that was something that is a part of the work, is like acknowledging, if nothing changes, what will happen? And you realize it's not sustainable. And that's so frustrating, because it means the end of things. It means you've got to consciously choose to end something and choose to start something else. And there is loss, and there is grief, and there's the death, in a way, death of self. And that is the story of what we're doing here. There's constant like expansion and contraction and change. And it's awful. Like, like, in a way, like, I just want to say to the parts that you speak from, the intellect and the desire to have all the bases covered and to see all the things. And when you realize you don't, and you're never gonna, and that some balls are gonna get dropped, and sometimes you will not have the space or the time or the privilege to process. You are literally running off of instinct. And sometimes it is not great. And we drop balls, and what I would say is mistakes are made. And I say that with tongue in cheek, because I come from a perspective knowing mistakes aren't a thing. Like, but that's from my own breakthroughs and being on the floor moments. I earned that perspective, like, you don't just, I just decided to think that. I was given that, or I was gifted that perspective, and I understood it deeply. And I'm like, God, it's so true. There really aren't, because I've looked at some of the most cornered, disastrous, I think I've just fucked this all up moments. I just really, and I can't unring that bell, to only learn down the road how that was necessary for my own growth and for those around me, to realize what I was trying to carry wasn't sustainable or reasonable, and other people had to be deeply inconvenienced. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know how you feel about this, but it came one day and I thought, God, I love this statement. In life, we're either asked to be a mess or make a mess. And sometimes both, and sometimes both at the same time. And we think, why is this happening? Why can't I rally like I used to? Why can't I run and do the things I used to do? Like, it could be physical, but it could be mental, it could be emotional, but it's like, there's an element of, I can't do this anymore. And we feel like there's something wrong with us, when it's not something wrong with us. It's like, it's like we've grabbed a ball and we've run with it. And we've run with it in a certain way for too long. And we didn't get the memo that we could stop, analyze, or, explore, and like ask ourselves questions about, how is this going? And does this honor my values? And is this leading towards a sense of me feeling more myself or authentic or fulfilled. And
Yeah,
life
the
doesn't
same
always
axis
present
still
that.
makes sense. Yeah.
Right. And so we need someone to come in and help us hit the pause button and make space for these parts and pieces.
Yeah.
Because it is a lot.
It is a lot. I've thought often with this kind of like elastic band metaphor.
Yeah.
So they, you can do, how like elastics, when they sit there, they disintegrate. But so you
Yeah.
can like do things to preserve the stretchiness of your elastic, of your energy. And maybe even we have the capacity to make a slightly bigger elastic, but by and large, you can either stretch it really, really wide, or you can stretch it really, really deep, or somewhere in between. And I got I don't know if it's the human condition that we need to sort of be careful about keeping elasticity, right? Like stretching it wide so you're covering a large like horizontal space, and then letting it go the other direction and going deeper. I really, really need the mix. And so what it felt like, right, was that I got so that the elastic was having to be pulled horizontally to cover more and more situations, more and more circumstances, more and more different kinds of things to navigate in the day. So it's getting more and more and more horizontal for survival. And then at one point it just got too horizontal, and I got stuck because my capacity to change that shape connected to the vertical thinking. And since all of my energy was going into surviving this horizontal stretch, it's like that's what I really needed, was help bringing elasticity, like sponginess, back into the elastic so I could let it change shapes. I don't like, I mentioned about how I need to be like, I am a deep thinker. I need space for that, but it doesn't mean I need the elastic stretch vertically all the time, right? Like I think it's healthy for it to be in a sort of like diamond shape sometimes and stretch horizontally all the way sometimes. I like that change and the rupture of going from one mode to the other. But there's this thing of, if the stretched vertically so you're going deep doesn't happen, then I become like that old elastic that sits in the drawer, and when you go to use it, it's just crumbled to pieces and it's useless. It can't do its function anymore.
Something isn't being nurtured. Like that's
Yeah.
when I think about that dried up, the risky elastic. It's like risky. You don't want to stretch it because you know it's going to snap.
Yeah.
And
You can't help
you
anymore. Yeah.
you can't help anymore. So when we're not nurturing,
Yeah.
that, and I love it, the word bandwidth, because that's
Yeah.
really what you're speaking to, right? Bandwidth.
Bandwidth.
And boy, I love this metaphor, because when you stretch it long ways, God, there's earnestness there. Like this is where, when people work with me, I'm like, here's the good news to the parts of you that think I'm going to toss them out, and the parts that you think you want to toss out. Like they're like, oh, I got this judgy part, or I got this part, or the overworky part, the part that just goes to work and gets it, and it's exhausting me, and I want that, chuck it out. And I'm like, that's not how this works, because all parts sometimes just get a memo about this is their role. So not only do we as people in our family systems or in society take on roles, parts of us and perspectives and belief systems will take on a role and be so freaking committed to it. And it will just believe forward motion is the way. Forward motion is where all the money's at, that's the sexy part. Yeah, it's like, yeah, more is better, doing more. And then I often meet people where they're like, I can't do anymore. Like this back part of this elastic is about to snap back on my ass, and it is going to hurt, and I can feel it, and I'm scared, And when they realize, or when I try to show them and demonstrate through their own parts and pieces, it's not just like textbook shit. It's like, let's bring one to the surface and have a conversation with it. The part that believes forward motion, it values a whole bunch of things: accomplishment, I finished a thing, completion, acknowledgement, things like that. But when there's no depth, when there's no, it's like forward in the action versus deepening learning. They're two like they work together. And if you have them in competition, So it's interesting how the exploration opens up doors in us, and we realize there's a part of me that really wants the deep learning, the processing, some of that time for deep thinking, to be creative, you know?
Yeah.
But then there's this other part that believes 100% that it's her job to keep things moving forward. Well, you're just in the middle then, and you're just gonna get pulled to pieces. Your arms and legs are gonna be out, and you won't be able to do anything. And so I love being able to facilitate the conversations from these parts and pieces, if only to understand what matters to them. And for everyone around the metaphoric boardroom table, it's not the most warmest metaphor, but where everyone actually has a voice and gets to be understood as a part of the whole. And I think from that understanding, and it's almost like clearing the air, where the part that's pulling the elastic forward stops and says, but this is why I'm doing it. And the part that wants to go deep goes, well, like, I love that about you. And, but this is what matters to me. And they're like, oh my God, like we didn't know. And there's kind of like this, I didn't know. It's
Yeah.
like best friends who haven't really been talking for a long time. They're like, oh my God, I didn't know. Oh my God, oh, I'm sorry. And it's like this, this kind of reunion of awareness of like, I had no idea I was making this so difficult for you by pushing things forward. It's like, well, that's okay. You didn't know, or we didn't know each other. Like we almost didn't know that we
Yeah.
were in this together. And this is a breakdown of parts work, but that's essentially the process. And each one within us holds values. They're just not talking about it to each other. But when they do, they start to be like, well, I can make room for that. Like, yeah, and they work together and nothing gets thrown away.
Away. Yeah.
What gets thrown away is the ignorance, maybe. It's maybe not a great word. It's like the absence of awareness, the absence of information.
Yeah. There aren't, I guess I talked about the triggers being a good observation point, and the thing, like you're pointing, this sort of like things that seem like contradictions often aren't. So it's like if you plunge into them, you can find the place where they're not actually a contradiction, and then things soften and you can move, and
I
it
think
looks
that's the
really
piece.
different. Yeah.
They soften. And I think that helps with the anxiety
Yeah.
that we end up feeling when our inner parts aren't actually in dialogue or know how to do that. I think that's an interesting learning in itself, is even realizing that about yourself, is that I always grew up thinking in some weird, like it was never really articulated, but an assumption that I was one thing. And I felt like I was like a solid state drive, and I'm not a computer nerd, but like that's what just came out of my face. But like, that I'm just this one thing. And values work was what cracked me open to realize I value family, and I value contribution, and I value community, and I value humor, and I value all sorts of things. So now what? You almost can have hundreds of values. And this conversation is hopefully translating to people that, much like, I call it subway art, like how certain, like, God, it's kind of 90s. But like subway art would have like words where some are big and bold, and some are, going down, vertical, and some are going horizontal, and some are different fonts. And they're all kind of a cacophony on a wall, like in the subway system.
Yeah.
And to me, it's an aliveness. There's an aliveness to it where when circumstances change or new information, like bringing that cerebral, like gathering information, well, with new information, our values get to change without us feeling like we're betraying ourselves. And I think that's the big piece, the softness that wants to be woven in to the work, to let people, it's like, oh, I don't have to choose one or the other. It's a yes, I value this and I value that. And this is changing right now because maybe my bank balance is at an all-time low and I need to value X, Y, and Z. Or my sister isn't well and I need to put work on the back burner because of that. And family takes a forefront, or self-care. and like how dynamic it is. And it speaks again to that elastic you're talking about.
Yeah, that it needs to
Letting
move.
it needs to move.
It's like I was
Oh,
searching to turn it into a giant square where I could be as wide as possible and as deep as possible at the same time. And it doesn't work that way. You can put it in a square, but the square is going to shrink, right? Because the surface space is limited. But I wanted, to stretch it out as far as it could and to put the outer mark of the square there, and then to put it vertically as far as it could and put the outer mark of the square there, which is bigger than the elastic is. And
and the part of you that wanted that, just for a second, and the part of you that wanted that, what that part of you, what does it value? Think about it. That part of you says, I want to stretch it out to here and I want to stretch it up to there because, like,
well, that again, that's the health thing and the experience and information gathering thing. It's
I'm
again,
here for it
it
all.
is
I
all
want as much as possible. It's like,
yeah.
and we learned that certain things we're inherently limited, and that's so crazy when we talk about self-work, like
Yes.
doing self-discovery work, is that the human package is limiting. Our bodies don't always get to do what bodies are conventionally meant to do. We're not all born with 10 fingers and 10 toes.
Yeah.
We're not all born in the most economically amazing places. You know what I mean? Like we're dealt a set of hands, a set of cards, so to speak. And when you get what you get and you work with it. But there's so much there in that, that one piece about like what we want versus what we have, and that our bodies are limited. I'm not a color. I'm not just pure energy. I'm a body that's shonky as hell and has its own consciousness, disease, illness, injury, that alone, right? Exhaustion, energy. And then there's circumstantial stuff. So, I mean, it's like, it's humbling, like what you were saying. I wanted it to go this, lengthways and height. And it can feel really.
Yeah. And I have some, again, the like really lucky things in my life, like one of them is good health. And, even though the words I'm very tired come out of my mouth often, it's because I've done an insane amount of stuff. I mean, I'm gifted with really quite a significant amount of energy. And like capacity to focus. I can focus for a really long time, but then I'm exhausted on the other side of it. But it took some, like the way that I am, it let me go a long time without actually starting to go, no, come on, this is too much when it's unrelenting. I mean, it went really, really far. Because I could endure. And, I talk about these breadcrumbs. There's a little breadcrumb when I first came to McGill as a postdoc, and they had a reception for all the new people, and it was in the history department. And I was talking to this woman she was senior faculty. And she sort of joked, but was serious, say, part of, as I watch this thing of who's successful and not successful in academia, she's like, some days I just wonder, does it come down to who can sit at the computer typing without distracting levels of pain for the longest? And I mean, that was the thing. I could work physically and with focus for such a long time. And I didn't have, like, I think maybe if some of these things like pain had started to kick in. And another piece of this that maybe I should have mentioned ages ago in the introduction, like I don't have kids, but I have a very maternal personality. And so again, there wasn't that check of like, oh my God, like, I'm at the office and it's late and this is going to be like terrible. I have to go home and, talk to my children about how their day went. That maternal energy was going to the stuff that was there, right? Like I could take care of my staff by staying later, by making sure more of the things that didn't create undue strain on them and contradictions in what was being asked of them. And I was very especially in one of the jobs where we went through a few years of pay freeze, and I was hyper aware of this. So like, this is maternal energy that's keeping me at the office late. I'm taking care of these people under my protection by trying to not let the distortion of this frozen pay and accelerating demands go too far out of control. And because I didn't have physical conditions that while I was
Yeah.
sitting there made it painful, right? Like I didn't start to have such a sore back that I had to just stand up and go. So then that's how I consistently ended up a husk, because I just didn't feel the cues because of this bizarre privilege of this capacity to keep focusing and to keep sitting at that computer and doing.
Oh my God. So it reminds me of the yes, no grid that comes with values work, right? Like
Yeah.
what you're saying yes to.
Yes.
This is where, values work just isn't, it's not about just picking like what matters to me. That's where you start. What do I love? What matters to me? There's all sorts of questions that, I break down in the modules through the Daring to Suck work that you were mentioning. And there's a point where, so you've got all these values. So now what? It's just, first of all, realizing you're a cacophony of values and that they literally lie in behind every decision you're making. And if you're not aware of why you're making that decision, well, you have that right to be aware and to start making decisions more consciously, more creatively from a place where you're behind the wheel and you're not being dictated to by situation and circumstance, which is essentially liberates us in our lives to make more conscious choices and change things from within. But what you were saying is, you were saying yes. So we're going to look at the yes column,
Yeah.
what you were doing and how you were being. So you were saying yes to sitting in front of that screen. You were saying yes to focus. It came easily, so that was easy. But you were saying yes to nurturing and being maternal with your staff, protecting them, being a buffer. All of these things you were saying yes to. There's more, right? Commitment. These are all values. Dedication, loyalty. You value loyalty, right? You value your community, and you value the work you're doing. So these are all they're all good. They're all good things. Make sense. But when you don't realize by saying yes to all of those things, there are a whole bunch of values that you're essentially shitting on or saying no to.
No, too.
But if
Exactly.
we don't know it, we don't know it. So it was like you were saying yes to all those things, but you were saying no to what?
But I mean, really, the most with the move, I guess there's the two things that make the biggest difference in how I feel and feeling like myself again. So one is having the space for deep thinking, but the other, like, I did not like who I was in my relationship anymore. I felt so wrong and un-me about like being a husk in almost all of our time together. I mean,
like not really present.
and beyond not really present. I mean, almost every day I'd fall asleep when he's talking to me.
That goes over well.
Because I was just so exhausted. There was nothing else.
Yeah.
And again, once in a while, and this is what I mean about this thing about, like I want to preserve that capacity to go like crazy when it's needed, but it can't be a situation where it's needed every day, all of the time. It just can't be. So it's important that sometimes you can come home as a husk, but there has to be an ebb and flow of when that demand is happening. And then you're this thing where as my energy wore thin and I became less patient, right? It was harder and harder to like keep the physical presence of patience at work. And so you're right, like because you're so tired, and as a human we get less patient when we're tired. So then when you come home, it's like your patience is at an absolute minimum because you've already been overstraining, overflexing that muscle all day long. And I really it's not just that I didn't feel good about this. Like at one point I'm just like, it's not even just the person, it's not even a sentence of this is not the person I want to be. It's like, this is not the person I am. And this is not right, and something's got to change so that this isn't this. And it's really, really lovely to have like real time together, and I just feel so much better about myself and my life now that I'm putting on a most day basis actual conscious energy and presence into my relationship. It's really one of the pieces that super changed. And it quieted a lot of, I talked about the overworked decade that, well, I overworked for longer than a decade, but it started to do me harm for about 8 to 9 years.
Yeah.
That there was a feeling of, I mean, I don't want to go too deep into like a self-loathing thing. It's not one of the big issues for me, but to the extent to which it was present around this thing of this beneath the surface hum that I'm just really no longer there for the people closest to me. And extroverted energy became very difficult for me. So if we go back again to the family piece, I was in Quebec, my family's in BC, something like picking up the phone and having even a 20-minute conversation with my parents, it was incredibly difficult. Not because I didn't want to talk to them, but because my extroverted energy was so depleted that I was like scraping. I mean, it wasn't even the bottom of the barrel. It's like I had scratched the bottom of the barrel down into the soil and was trying to pick up, it was beyond bottom of the barrel levels of energy.
Well, like you were saying, the things that make you you, the things that you love about yourself, the things that matter most, when you start seeing those deteriorate, and like from saying yes to all the things, all the overwork, but you understand why you're doing it, so it almost fuels it, right? And when you don't see what you're saying no to, like enjoyment, connection, presence, patience, those were all of the values that were being stepped over for other values. So this is why they're not in competition, but it's about quality of life. It's about the quality of the experience you're having here. And I think if we boil it all down to that, that question of like, how's the experience of your life feeling right now? And through this conversation, helping people realize that don't worry about what you want to say that is truthful. If your experience isn't great, you're one acknowledgement away from realizing that you have control over choice, that you can now interrupt the standard program, like all it takes is a moment to just acknowledge what you are saying yes to. Make that list as good, bad, or ugly. It's not about it being better. It's just, what are you saying yes to? There can be bad things on that list that you want to judge. There can be really good things on that list. It's just about knowing what you are saying yes to consciously. And then realizing there's an equal and opposite that goes on, that you're stepping over certain things that also matter. And when you see the two side by side, it gets very interesting to say, whoa, well, no. First of all, I feel like the first wave of when I see that for myself, because I rinse and repeat values work, because our values are always growing and changing. But when I see it, it helps. The first wave is, no wonder. It's almost like this graceful wave, just a ton of grace of like, no wonder I feel off. No wonder I feel like shit, or no wonder I feel frustrated, because I'm in an internal tug of war with things that I haven't acknowledged consciously, that I'm saying yes to all these things and doing all of these things, or even being this way. But I'm not, by doing those things and saying yes to it, I'm also saying no to this list. And I'm stepping on these values that, based on my life right now, I'm realizing how important they actually are. And that's where the dis-ease, then you get to see the whole picture, the wholeness of the dis-ease that is happening in the experience of our life. And that knowledge is power, because from what you know, you can change and you can get creative. I mean, that's what we're here to do. Be creative with whatever we are aware of.
Yes. Yeah, all the spaces that, I mean, I guess you can always work on things everywhere, but the places where, you really have like new space and space to work differently. And then, what does that crack open?
Yeah, because in that first life, not first, but that version of your life in Montreal, there was no space. There was no space. There was no time. It was all taken up with very important things that you were reiterating. This is important. This is important. This is me. This is what I do. But stepping over that other column of values that were like, him. They're just like, excuse me, us too. We're not trying to compete, but we'd really love you to be aware of like what you're stepping over to get here every morning. Like you're not really enjoying your life, and you're barking at your partner, and you don't talk to your family, and on and on. And it can hurt. Like I think it's important to acknowledge that moment when you see it, and it hurt when I first saw my list, and I felt heartbroken. I even felt shame, of like, how come I didn't see this? I didn't know these tools existed, and it's almost like a comeuppance, you just feel like it's all out on the table, and there's these waves of like, I wish I had known, and how could I have done this? Almost feeling bad to myself about myself. And it all is all clear to me now, and I just feel bad. And some people, me included, at times interpreted that as like, well, that sucks, and this is the dead end of the road. Like, that's just terrible. I don't want to see all of this stuff because it makes me feel bad. And I guess I want to be there to be like, no, I say, don't let some very valid tears and shame, like healthy shame, get in the way of change. Like, what if it's a natural layer to move through because awareness brings feelings that we don't love, because it feels like I should have known, or I could have, and regret and all sorts of things. And boy, we can get stuck there because we think, well, if it feels bad, then this process is bad. This is a bad process. It's like, not at all. Those are natural feelings and valid.
And they're the ones that open space.
Yeah.
Like tearing muscle, right?
Yeah.
If you want it to grow, you need, right? Your muscles don't grow if you never strain them.
It's such a good, that's a good one. Yeah. Because if we knew that's what was happening, I don't think we'd be so gung ho, like, yeah, I'm going to go tear my muscles today.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to go do that. But that is exactly what happens. You end up taking something that is maybe smooth and intact, but not functioning very well.
Yeah. Or it's always going to keep functioning the same space of ways. And maybe that same space of ways isn't the best one, or doesn't make sense anymore. Again, it's this constant.
It's not being challenged. And to challenge it is to open it up and see what else it can become as a result of opening it up. Yeah. And I think if we think about it too much, it's just counterintuitive, and we probably wouldn't do it if we kind of thought about it too much. And that's why it's such a partnership between the head and the heart and the body and the soul too. There's a whole team involved, in tearing things open in a way. It's tearing sounds so destructive, but it's really about opening things up. And like you said, rupture, I think it's a really powerful word. It's almost like the more you slow down and acknowledge things, there is an arising, like stuff arises, because that part of you that was pulling the elastic was like, no, all the values and moving forward, we don't slow down, and we don't slow down. And there's like, no, and we don't slow down, because if we slow down, then things show up, things bubble up, feelings. And anyway, we don't need to talk about it. We're just going to keep moving forward, and that fascinates me, the whole process, that we'll actually invite people into our lives, like coaches and therapists, and to help us slow down, to be with the fullness of our life, no matter what state is in. And there are ruptures that happen, and awareness, it's beautiful, as I think Glennon Doyle captured that phrase, or coined that phrase. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, it is.
So like on the other, the way you would talk about like how you used values work in this process, what are some pieces that you like, tools that you have used that stand out for you?
Well, I feel like, part of the amazingness was how the smallest tool could make a big difference. So the first one stands out in memory most, and it is as easy as the but and. So like to catch, where do I say but? Because actually I said but really a lot in this analytical mind. And to start swapping that out with and it connects to values because it's like, you're do the and statements make more sense with your values? And consistently, I found really quickly, yes. And
Like
that
what would be an
catching of,
example?
well, I mean, we've sort of talked in this workspace, right? So let's say, okay, there's all this stuff sitting in front of me, but I should take the time to go to yoga. Right? Like it's stark, but then you can, this is kind of a bad example because it's almost too everyday mundane, but it's the concept, and I should go to yoga. And then it's like you think about it in a different way. It's not these two things in conflict. It's like the and invites different kinds of questioning. Okay, both of these are important. Okay, now let's reflect on what are like today is today. And if I stop now and do take the time to go to yoga, is it okay in this space? Have I actually done a lot? And it's like it honors the work that's being done as well. It just lets the things coexist in a different way. And then this thing, it's like almost I started having, like those old Broadway neon light, flashy light things go off. When I said but, it just became hyper alert to me. And then to start swapping it out with and then thinking about, okay, how does this let me think around the values that feel like they're competing with each other in a softer way? And then the power of having that word jump out, then I started catching should in the same way. And once it happened a couple times, I'm like, oh, you should do the same thing with should that you did with but, right? And then so it started jumping out and you could really observe and then go like, why are you saying should? And again, you sort of retroactively asking, what values does that connect to? And is that should working the way you think? And again, often a small swap of should to could, right? I could do this rather than I should do this. And it changes the way that you think about the words. And actually, I mean, I get physical sensations of my brain working sometimes. So there was like I felt a rewiring of how my brain was accessing values and value words from changing, right? It's like if you use the word and or but,
yes,
your brain accesses your values through one set of circuit way that's much more rigid. And if you access your values through a language of should instead of could, your brain synapses are going through a different process to access those values words. And so I felt, again, not so much that I had different values emerge. I'd had a really different relationship with my values emerge. And again, sort of connecting back to this thing too, right? Like if you're saying yes to this, what are you saying no to? Like those kinds of things start to become a really organic part of what you think. So it was more in this than I was actually struck by the continuity of my values. Like really struck by this,
like almost more reassured that you were doing more. I kind of get this feeling like you were reassured that you weren't fucking it all up. Like it's like you were almost buoyed by like what you discovered as opposed to feeling like it was more destructive. Like when you start switching those words out, it shifts the energy from choosing one or the other and even judgment about right or wrong into words like consideration and choice and like considering all of the parts and realizing they both hold value, just different values, and that it's more about understanding. That when you went in with a dialogue of understanding using the word and,
yes,
there's a culture of understanding using the word and, but when you use but, it's yes or no, right or wrong, good or bad.
right or wrong.
They're two, it's almost like two different lands,
Yeah.
Isn't that
really is.
amazing? And should, so but and should are kind of over here with the judgment and the yes, no, right, wrong. And could are like, you could, choice, options, experience. Like, it's just like, choose your own adventure. It's like this like kind of delightful choice-based culture. And over and learning actually feels like it's more over on that and could side. And
Yeah.
but and should is like, it's just like, you're good, you're bad, you're right, you're wrong.
Yeah. It's
Will
like
you
I
make
was,
it?
yeah. It's like those hard words, the judgy ones, right? The buts and the shoulds. It's like they're the wrong tools for accessing your values. They automatically create a distortion in them. Whereas the and the coulds and the like, those are words that better reflect my values. And so they let me access my values in such a better way. It removes this seeming contradiction.
It's like one side shuts down dialogue,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
that. I hope everyone's appreciating this, because I'm loving it. Yeah, the buts and the should, it just shuts down communication under a veil of judgment, right, wrong, good, bad. And
All
using
against my values, right? Like,
all like it's the irony. I mean, the human experience loves irony. And then the and the could, it opens up dialogue. It opens up it values exploration. I mean, you can even see values in the culture. Like, it literally values dialogue. It values discourse, even. Like, yeah, like, let's do this. We're family. It's almost like a healthy family dynamic. Like, we're just here to know about each other. And it's like, let's go. Whereas on this other side, it's like, yes, no, right, wrong. Are you in or are you out? And, like, it feels very finite,
yeah.
and not very creative.
And not very, yeah, it sets up this darkness. Like, I mean, if we
Wow.
go, like, these sort of daily examples of like saying something like, I value being a good manager and I value being a good partner in my relationship. Right.
Yes.
If you put but, it makes it feel like
Sophie's choice.
sort of have to, yeah, choose sides, as opposed to
One dies,
and.
one lives.
Yeah.
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 As opposed to both are of value, and they're both worthy of conversation uniquely to themselves. So let's draw a circle around each one and explore, realize what's important about your relationship, realize what you feel like might be working and not working. Same with work. And I think sometimes that is hard for us to manage on our own. I think that is a very fair thing to say. We all need a container, and some guidance, some facilitation in a way, because we are human, and we will get swirly with stuff. We will go into eddies and corners of things and rabbit hole, and we need some adult supervision, about like, yeah, like, you're taking this a little too far, Keri-Anne, or like, like, we all need that, because it comes with the model. Like, it just, our desire to get to the bottom of things, or to fix the problem. And even that in itself is a whole other conversation. But like, it's just inherent with this human package, that there's always
I don't
something
know,
that comes
just to hear what it sounds like, when you answer questions that come from another person, because when you're talking to yourself in your head, you're asking the questions and you're making the answers. It takes on a particular, I don't know, a particular sound, a particular cadence. And sometimes having somebody outside of you ask questions that are different from the ones you would ask, or even if they're the same and you hear the stuff that actually comes out of your mouth, you catch things there.
That's the thing. So, like, one of the first pieces that I offered people when I first started this work was around values. And that's why I just always loved the way you talked about that module and how you got so energized. And I love it when people do that, because it's how it felt when it came through me. And I was like, all I was told was ask so many different questions, and not to overwhelm, but to present alternative doorways for people to walk through, and rooms for people to explore about what makes them tick, about what matters, about what lights them up, and about what also pisses them off. Because things that piss you off, which people think, well, that doesn't sound like a value. It's like, well, you pay attention to anything that really upsets you, something you feel very upset about, and you would stand up for. It's the opposite of that thing. So if you can't stand people that are late, You value people being on time, which is very obvious, because what? Why is it important for people to be on time? Because it shows what? Respect,
Yeah.
consideration. So these are what it drills down to. And then you realize, oh, I value respect, and that's important to me. And you start to see. So it's like some questions just don't really ring bells for people, but others, they're like, oh, I want to answer that. Like, what do I love? And what does matter to me? And why is that important? You know?
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to, I was saying that this piece of like observe your triggers really helped me, because it was that, right? Like I was feeling like if I was triggered, it was like a problem, a failure. And again, that question of, okay, right, you're being triggered for a reason. What values are you experiencing as being betrayed, or what agreements also, right? That this way
Yeah,
that
that was
framing
another
it, which is
module.
very
Yeah.
interwoven.
Yeah.
And
Relationship with
that's
things.
telling you really important information. It was super, super helpful. And I did, yeah, I had a pretty thick skin around that one. Triggered moments were personal failure.
Well, it's so interesting because I was just thinking your little 5-year-old just poked her head and was like, hey there, Miss Lady. It's like, remember me who was wondering if I could withstand solitary confinement? Like,
I still think about this.
I know, like, I just love her, right? Because that's fascinating and like just speaks to like her badassery, like, and no wonder that would be like triggers would feel like a failure, because from a very fundamental age, you were kind of already building up like, what's my capacity? What can I handle? And so any sign of not being able to handle something. And if anyone said, well, what does it mean to handle something? These are questions that we don't ask ourselves. Because as soon as you start, well, what does that mean to handle? I don't know. It's just like we were literally running on assumptions. We just hear word, yeah, that sounds good. I can handle stuff. Well, what does that even mean? And like, what expectations are you holding yourself at this age and at 5 years old? Like, fascinating shit. I mean, if it's not fascinating, that's the piece that I think buoys me, is discovering how fascinating I am, how fascinating you are. And I think that helps. It helps us keep going. It helps us keep exploring and digging in a way, like, because it's reassuring. It's like, oh, some people are really afraid what they're going to find. Did you ever feel like that?
Yes, I did. I can't, I remember the feeling. I can't remember specific instances. But I mean, not so much what not so much what I'd find about myself, but I felt fear, I guess, around like laying bare a relationship with, whatever, a friendship or with family or something that I see is like, really great and precious. And then, like maybe a resistance to looking at a moment I didn't feel that way. Right. It's sort of like I had already wrapped that up.
You don't want to
And
sully something that you all, this is where the and the but also help. Because we love, let's say, our parents, and we have cherished memories and we value them and we love them. And it's also hard to acknowledge that there are moments that are heartbreaking and that we didn't deserve. And it can feel like a betrayal, like against them, but also against our values, because that love is there and it is very real.
So I felt resistance, to going into some of those spaces, right? Of I felt resistance or fear around admitting that somebody I treasured and treasured the nature of the relationship, of going into a place where something had happened that was still sitting there, because it was almost like you're gonna like release the infection and dirty things instead of clean it away.
And what did you learn about that process when we did do that? Because there were moments where that did happen.
Yeah, I mean, I had to really teach myself to, okay, I have this thing, and Keri and I've talked about it before, that this feeling of like a constantly present eye on my life. And so it was work to start to say like, okay, let's delve into whatever, a family memory or a relationship memory, a friendship memory, and let's actually voice your most uncomfortable spot there, and that it's safe to do so, right? Like it before, it was always there. I don't know, these questions of that, might I, show it to them one day, or like it was almost always being, the thoughts almost were happening with a kind of like, I'm an author and this is eventually going to have public consumption feel around it. And it took work to let myself write. I mean, because it had to be more than just thinking. It had to come out and to crack into that space of writing things that judged people in moments in ways that I don't actually judge them on the whole, and for that to be okay. And once I crossed that hurdle, a lot of stuff really started to change.
Thank you for bringing this up, because there's a fear that if we see the whole picture of anything, whether it's a relationship or a situation, that it will somehow diminish the either affection or the love or the goodness that is absolutely there, by acknowledging the not so greatness of it. And it is a muscle it is hard. It is like going underwater. It can feel like drowning at times. You're not sure where it's going to go. You're kind of worried that it's going to wreck everything. I speak from my own personal experience, feeling like I don't know where this is going. I hate it. I'm worried that it's going to wash everything away. Like this one piece that feels so emotional to me. And by the way, it only felt that emotional because I had never acknowledged it. And I had 30, 40 years of built up energy around it that I had never opened that door. And when I did, it felt like a tidal wave, which then told me maybe this is bigger than I think it is. And now it really is going to wash away all the good that I do love about that person, or even that memory. And it's all gone. And I've just wrecked everything. It's just very real. And I'll speak from my experience and what I hold and I witness in those I work with, you included, is that it is so brave to allow the truthful perspectives to come through, like a wounded child perspective, part of you that felt maybe abandoned or not seen, and to allow that space to express itself alongside the love that is absolutely there, but to also love yourself and the version of you that also said that wasn't okay. I wish it were different and I'm heartbroken. Like how those two things can coexist using the bridge of and or could. And realizing, I think there's someone once spoke about spiritual mastery being when you realize two equal and opposite things or opposing things can live under the same umbrella and not be in competition. It's a yes and each part has value. You get to keep all of the good and the truth of the love that you have for that person, and love the version and experience that you had that was deeply wounded. And it isn't about bringing it to those people, like thinking that they need to know, we need to hash this out, because I know, I always tell people, please don't put that expectation out there, because you really need to make sure you're doing that with somebody that has done some work, there's a lot of pressure on another human being to be able to handle you in that moment and be able to honor what you're trying to achieve, which is just connection and whatnot. But like, I guess, it's like trusting that you can survive the messiness of that interchange of allowing the good, but also the distorted or the diseased or the awful thing that was also there, and to move through that process to see what's on the other side of it.
And I felt a lot of like an anxiousness popped up when I was brushing up against those spaces, but then it takes on a different shape, like the triggers thing.
It changes form. Simply by letting it hit the air. Like it's almost like just by letting it be in the space, we don't realize the value of just letting something be whatever it is as it arises, We just have, because we're not taught to express ourselves openly or to even trust our emotions, we're white knuckling it, through those moments, hoping that we come out the other side okay, and that our relationship will be intact. How we see that other person will still be okay, but more importantly, how we feel about ourselves in that relationship. And it does feel so counterintuitive to allow something that might feel poisonous or like dark or like drudgy and sludgy up into the space, and to let the flow of the process and the expression almost like run muddy water clear, like through a pipe. And the more you allow the flow, that will get clearer. But to trust that, it's like that is a muscle in itself.
Yeah, it really is. But it builds up. Yeah.
There's a
That's
tipping
why the
point.
muscle metaphor is really good.
It is. It builds up, and you realize you can rely on it, and you can rely on yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for talking about that. Yeah, it's like, it's really about, the process, but it's like on the other side of that, the result of that. I don't know, like, how would you describe the result of that? Like, what's the point of that? What is that? Like you said, it builds the muscle up, but what does it offer?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is simply just, a better and better capacity to touch the real.
Mm.
And I mean, that's the thing with values, right? You can come up with tons of words, and you can cover pages with words that reflect values. But then if you start going, okay, what's the value behind this value? And then that's sort of where I come more and more, right? Like, it's the real.
It's like
I
getting to a
value
truer
the
version of you.
real.
Yeah,
And everything, right, it connects to this. It's not just that I want experiences, it's that I want lots of different kinds of experiences, because I'm aware that the ones you have form what you're able to see and understand of the real. And so the more you can disrupt that, the closer you can get to it. And I don't know, I feel like, all good things come from the real.
Well, and I would say that you live realer. You create realer. When that's something that you realize, is that you value the real. You're more curious to get to what else is there. What else is here to learn? What else is here to talk about? And it peels back those layers. And I think there's a natural or an organicness, like a way of doing it where it's not like you're pushing or forcing. It's a natural flow. Like, and of course, that's what I want to say. There's a tipping point, like you were saying, like, and it gets, that muscle builds. And then it's almost like this threshold that gets crossed, and things just get realer or better or truer and aligned, cleaner. And like, and now you're living this new life with all these new bells and whistles and facets and cupboards and doors. And like, you're in, like, it's like you took yourself and just were able to place yourself in a new reality, but a reality that aligns.
Yeah. And that it was bizarre, right? Because even though it was a complete disruption of how I spent my time, I didn't have an emotional experience of rupture with the transition. Which was really, I still reflect on this, and sometimes I'm like, am I just going to be like walking down a path one day and all of a sudden I'm going to go like, oh my God, I'm actually going to feel it. I don't know, but I think it is more that it wasn't actually rupture that I was after, it was disruption. And that the disruption was very connected to very specific things that were already there and already so present. So there's this continuity of evolution in spite of this massive disruption of how I'm living my days.
Yeah, like you're waiting for the shoe to drop, or like for the reality to set in, and you're going to have this epiphany of emotion, and it's going to hit you. And you're walking down British Columbia street, whatever, in British Columbia, and like, oh, I did this thing. And I mean, I could say the same thing about what we've done. Like people would think, okay, so you sell all of your stuff, just like you kind of sold some stuff and you moved. And ours, we just didn't move to another place. We moved into a lifestyle, which is always moving, and traveling the world and being in the most surreal places. Just as surreal as it is for you to walk by a riverbed now as an everyday thing, or see the ocean, or and it's like such a bizarre reality in comparison to your previous life.
Yeah.
And that we would maybe hold expectations, like expect to have these, like, not come to Jesus moments, but like, oh my God, like it's just this flood of emotion, or this, and it's not. And I'm the same with you. It's like, I think people are sometimes disappointed to hear that I'm not like, I don't know. I think it's because the more emotional element is when we're in like misalignment.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
you know what I mean? It's like when I wasn't living my values, living in the basement suite, having, issues with neighbors and just constant conflict, that was where the emotions were. And it's like the tipping point, once you get into motion, once you get into action, it all just feels very much more myself. And it's almost like I can breathe,
Yeah.
and I feel more here. And I don't feel like the need to have a big emotional outburst or epiphany or top of the mountain moment. It just actually feels more natural and more me.
Yeah, exactly. There's
Which could be
moments of
maybe,
like,
yeah,
like excited awareness. I mean, I have a really
yeah.
beautiful view. I live over a
Appreciation,
lake, and I can have this
gratitude.
overcome of I can't
Yeah,
believe that this is, what I
yeah.
get to open the curtains and look at. But it's not
An event. It's not an
yeah,
event. It's not a finish line. It's
yeah.
like you are it. I say it's like, I wrote something the other day and it's like, I don't know how we're doing this, but it's happening. Like, it's happening. It's happened. We did a thing. We made a choice. And now it's happening, but we're happening. Just like, and it made a lot of sense for me to say it like that. And I think that's also what you're speaking to. Like, yeah, you did a thing. You moved places. It happened, but it's happening and you're happening with it now.
With it.
Yeah. And that's the power of like diving into something as simple as what matters to you and values, and like how catalytic such simple questions can be.
Yeah, they always work as a touchstone. Again, I don't have a problem with living outside my values. So I don't ever surface like, oh my God, I'm doing this thing that's, over there in evil land. It's like, okay, that is a value, but look at how much space you're giving it when it's actually a fifth tier rather than a first and second tier value. And then again, you just anchor yourself in those values questions. Okay, does the situation mean that makes sense right now? Right. And if it makes sense right now, then I can, then you talk to those other values almost, right? You tell it, yeah, you're really important. I'm not, it's just that for now, I need to put you aside because of the situation. And you don't feel this friction anymore. So the work in that space, like it really helps. And it does just consistently help rein in the spiraling so that you're thinking about things that are connected.
It's not, and you're not the problem. There are parts and pieces at play here that deserve a little dialogue, a little bit of exploration, some expression to see what the heck's going on and what's coming through them, and to realize that you're a multifaceted being in a multifaceted experience, and there's so much grace in that. It means that you aren't the problem. It means there maybe is a problem, but through the exploration, you can better identify what is rubbing you the wrong way and what is working and what isn't, if only to get more creative and conscious and to consciously create something as a result of what you discover.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing to me, the logic, because I would not consider myself a very logical person. I would consider, and I love how we work together because you bring that intellect and that logic. And I just love being in your space when you talk and how you talk about things. But like how logical this thing that I walk around, like there's almost like an emotional logic to it. I
Yes,
sometimes call it
absolutely.
emotional math. And
Yes.
people get, my husband just laughs. He's like, you suck at math. I'm like, I know, but I know these numbers. Like I know these numbers. And there's stuff that just makes sense and it fits and it flows, and stuff when it doesn't add up. And
Yeah.
that's where we get curious. And yeah, you kind of start cracking the code and you realize like you have way more power than you realized. You have way more control, so to speak, or at least choice. Yeah. So what would you say to anybody listening that feels like they are maybe where you were at? Like how, yeah, like kind of lost in all those rules and responsibilities and kind of tangled up in maybe the mess.
Following the breadcrumbs one at a time actually really does do something. And I guess to plunge into the reasons why you're staying, they might be more significant than you think, right? Even if you know that you want to change that situation, why you're still in it, and maybe why you're going to stay in it for another stretch of time. There's reasons there, and to go into that, and to know that it doesn't mean something closed, right? Like again, coming back sort of to this idea of math, it's not an equation of okay, I realize that I'm staying here because of XYZ, even though I actually want out. It doesn't mean that you've just found the equation that captures reality. It just means that you are understanding why you're still in that phase of the process. Again, it's a kind of grace, right? So to allow grace for it to be a series of small things, and to not underestimate the power of like just posing new questions and opening new space in your mind to think about things. I mean, it sounds really small to talk about these words, and instead of but and could instead of should. But
Yeah.
like this is a small thing, right? Like it's the smallest thing that you can decide to do. Just take note of when I say but, and think about, can I replace it with and why did I say but, and how is it different? And just that one set of things can open so much space, and you don't need to know where it's going next. You can feel that it's opening a space that's healthy and that has fresh oxygen in it. And then once you get in and you do some breathing of that fresh oxygen, then you can decide about the next level. You don't need to find a magic formula out. I just these small things, they really matter, and they really make a difference. And then it's like you start to notice what are the, if we keep it anchored in values, because again, values is interwoven with so many of the different themes, but like you will notice that certain values come up repeatedly, and so then you know that those are the ones you need to go into the most deeply. And you'll notice the way they cluster together, which again is part of the work of that module. Those small things really matter, and not to judge yourself on like, oh, I'm still here and I'm trying to get there. It's really it's not helpful. Right. Okay, so like what do you feel is a friction point? What is a small thing that happens with that? Is it opening space? And just go with this. I felt a lot of pressure of time. I mean, actually, that was the thing that signaled that something in me had changed. I started to feel this anxiety around time, and I don't mean death. It just all of a sudden felt like there wasn't enough time, like the hum of what time is shifted. And now so then I felt this pressure, right? And I think maybe a lot of people feel that, like, I haven't done it by this marker, right? I said inside of 6 months I would be blah blah blah, and I think these things are very disruptive. And maybe the lesson from, as much as I'm on another side now, is that there really is more time than you think if you're living anything like the cluster feeling that I was. And I didn't feel like there was time. I felt like there was an urgency that there was, and there was an urgency of a need to change, but there wasn't the urgency of time that I thought. And it's really incredible to feel time again in a way that is so much healthier than what I was.
I think you've touched on so many things here. And I just want to fan some of the flames because, yes, so many people can feel overwhelmed by what arises. There can be this natural or even a subconscious worry of, if I say it, if I see it, I'm going to have to, like the timepiece, I'm
Yeah.
going to have to do something about it right away. I'm going to have to, like, urgency. And what you've just beautifully offered them is what the truth is, which is like the most important thing is to allow space for it to be known,
Yeah.
for it to be aware, and that something in you will arise. You just handed that to them and you said, don't worry, something will come up that will respond, that will feel natural, that will feel normal, that will feel like an almighty of course, that literally buoys this whole process. Oh, I'm so excited because it's just reiterating what I know about this work, which is once you get in motion of expressing, of exploring and expressing yourself, you start happening. And you almost feel a passenger to it because all of a sudden you're blurting the next thought or the next insight or the next, well, hang on. Well, that tells me that, and you're just like, what? And you're having this like epiphany moment. And it only came from your commitment to admitting whatever is on your heart, whatever feels true. And so many people need to know that they're in safe hands when it comes to themselves.
Hmm.
No matter
Yeah.
the mess that you are swimming in, like the sea of stuff that you have, that you could blame yourself. Oh, I did this to me. I made this choice. Look at what I've created. Oh my God, blah, blah, blah. And now I'm going to see how awful I am. Like, oh my God, it's just so true. So like, I just like that. I just need to acknowledge that, like how true that is when it comes to self-development work. Oh no, I don't really want to, because I'm going to see how I did all of this. That's not what happens when you're in the right container and you realize that the process is just get moving, get admitting, start truth telling with yourself. And you'll see you couldn't be in better hands because you have answers to questions you didn't even know. You didn't even slow down and let yourself ask.
Yeah, the questions are powerful. Like I say, just one small thing, right? Like just choose one different question. It doesn't need to be any bigger than that.
Yeah. And what's cool about this, so thank you for letting me talk to you about, how that module, because I'm opening up the module for people to work with. And that's a part of this. I wanted to talk about the power of values work and then invite them to try it on for themselves. So that is something that is available to them through whatever links are provided below. The magic fairies in my life will make that happen. And what a powerful doorway, they open the doorways and all the bloody questions that I was given intuitively to say, go offer these to people and let you, like, let your nose lead. It sounds weird, but I always would tell my clients, like, let your, that hound dog in the cartoons and its nose would be on the ground. I'm like, that's how it feels. Oh, I love that question. I want to go explore that. Like you can trust where your instincts want to lead you, even if it's a door that feels like, oh, this one feels a little hot. What if you can trust that maybe it needs some oxygen to have what you might call a rupture, but it's holy as hell. And like, yeah, it might burn your eyebrows off at first, but they'll grow back. It's like, and you've got what it takes to move through this,
Yep.
So many people needed to hear what you just said. So
Well,
thank
hope
you.
it can help. It's been helpful.
It's been such a joy. And I would love to have you back anytime you want to talk about anything else around this stuff.
All righty.
Because like to change your life from those two columns, from sitting behind that screen and kind of, to walking in the open air now and having so much more harmony. It's huge.
It
The
is huge.
enjoyment that you've created in your life, Like people think, oh, like goal setting and it's got to be this big, bold, over the top thing. It's like the older we get,
Oh,
it's the simpler things. It's about
it is.
harmony and ease
The
and
real.
connection and real and simple.
Yeah.
And yeah, and thank you for sharing your journey.
Yeah.
I love you
Thank you
so
for
much.
inviting me. Love you too. Thank you for all the word that just came to mind is fun things to play with. Yeah, maybe just put that as a little addendum on. It is actually fun, even though it can be hard and all those other things too.
Yeah, unfamiliar.
Yeah.
We often equate hard with unfamiliar, right? Uncomfortable, but yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad it's fun.
Yeah, Keri-Anne's got a good laugh. It helps.
And the weirdest shit flies out of my mouth. Anyway, thank you for tolerating that or appreciating it.
Yeah,
Thank you so
appreciate it.
much, Dawn. We'll talk to you
Thank you.
soon. Thank you so
Sounds good.
much.
Mwah.